Is the race by the major powers for the Arctic resources worth it? The place is cold, inhospitable and desolate. But we could be missing something. Where we see costs, others see opportunity. And so what does it cost to put your flag onto the Arctic? Join me and Darasz for How We Got Here.
The land of ice, the subject of ancient legend, and now the site of a new gold rush. As climate change has an increasingly severe impact on this region, the world's powers are vying for its resources. Oil, natural gas, and various mineral deposits can all be found here.
With the melting of the ice cap, there has been a great deal of discussion among Arctic and non-Arctic states about the economic potential.
But the cherry on the top in this case is a new shipping route. There are currently two running around the North Pole, the Northern Sea Route and a Northwest Passage. The recent changes to the Arctic, however, open space for a third, more direct one, the proposed Transpolar Sea Route. And whoever will control this new route, some say will control the Arctic's economic potential. The 21st century is not the first period during which the Arctic has played an important role. All the way back in the 19th century, explorers and leaders alike were aware of its potential. It wasn't until World War II and the Cold War, however, that the world's powers began tapping into the Arctic fully. There are currently three sides to this race for the Arctic. Russia is one of the most prominent players in the region and has been making very aggressive forays into the Arctic over the last few years. The sanctions imposed on it for its invasion of Ukraine have forced Moscow to search for new resources. And given Russia's expansive border with the Arctic, it seems an obvious choice. The second player is the United States and its NATO allies, Canada and Norway in particular. As Russia pushes into the region, the Western allies are looking both to secure the new shipping routes and resources, as well as counteract Russian designs.
To understand the Arctic, we have to work in the Arctic. And so the ability to have forces here working in the Arctic really increase our overall readiness as a NATO force.
Then there's the third player, China. Beijing doesn't have direct access to the Arctic and has therefore been working more closely with Russia to achieve its goals here. This is another area of cooperation between the two. Widely seen as an economic powerhouse, China seeks to uphold this reputation and carve out a stake for itself in the race, no matter the criticism it has drawn from other interested parties.
China has been participating in Arctic affairs in line with the basic principle of respecting win-win cooperation and sustainable development.
Scientists and activists alike are warning of the dire effects the ice cap melting will have on the environment. But it is becoming increasingly clear that what interests many of the world's powers the most is what that melting ice and snow has been hiding, and the price that might be paid for access to it.
I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Przemysław Piotr Damski, and he is at the Department of Theory and History of International Relations at the University of Łódź. Welcome along to the programme.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
We're going to be talking about the Arctic today, your speciality. First question to you, what is there in the Arctic that attracts Russia, China, United States, Canada, all these great powers vying for what seems to be an empty wilderness?
The Arctic is interesting for several reasons. And the first major reason is that the climate is changing. And because of the climate change, we observe several difficulties in the Arctic. For example, the problems with for the inhabitants of the Arctic, the people who are living there.
So how many? Do we count them in millions or hundreds of thousands? What's that?
Rather hundreds of thousands. This is not a very dense region, but it is very interesting for the issues concerning natural resources, mainly oil and gas. According to the estimates delivered in 2008, around 30% of undiscovered oil, world undiscovered oil, is in the Arctic, and 13% of undiscovered, 30% of gas and 13% of oil is in the Arctic. So it's quite a lot of natural resource there. Of course, this is a costful thing. That is why when we have mineral resources and any other issues, different states are not very eager to dig there, but oil and gas are important. And another issue which is important is, of course, transportation, because when we go via Arctic to Europe or to to North America from Asia, it is a shorter passage in some cases. We have right now two routes: Northwest Passage near the United States and Canada, and Northeast Passage near Norway and Russia, where this very key element of this Northeast Passage is so-called Northern Sea Route, entirely controlled by Russia. Once the ice cap is going to melt, probably around 2035, the North Pole is going to gain another major road, which is transpolar route via North Pole. So it can be interesting as well for that for this issue.
And countries like Russia, China, you said that they are in the Arctic. It's about definition. What is there that is already by treaty belongs to those countries. They're not scrambling for territory that.
The problem is that how we define Arctic. There is no one definition of this region. Some people say that it's a circumpolar region. In some cases, we say that it is the line northwards concerning the isometer 10 Celsius degrees July, or the line of the trees, and so on and so on. So we have no one approach this, and based on that, the Arctic is a different space. However, the central for the Arctic is the Arctic Council, which governs 8 Arctic states, together with the United States, Canada, Iceland, Norway, Finland, Sweden, Russia, and Denmark, thanks to the Greenland and Faroe Islands. However, and those states are competing, or they have disputes in the Arctic because they want to get the access to natural resources or to sea routes. However, all of those disputes by 2022 were resolved legally. In case of China, China does not have any specific territorial claims because China is not the Arctic state. However, in 2008, recognizing that Arctic is important, China named itself near Arctic state. None of the Arctic states recognize this term, even Russia.
So it's near enough in its own definition.
Yeah, and China here is very interested in the Arctic because of natural resources and the access to the natural resources, and because of sea routes. One of the elements of this major Chinese plan entitled Belt and Road Initiative is Polar Silk Road, which goes through Russian Northern Sea route.
I mean, you can see on the map that there's going to be flashpoints between not just Russia and not just the West and the East to broadly describe them, but also Russia and China. If Russia doesn't recognize China as an Arctic power, then you can envisage clashes, naval clashes.
Chinese-Russian relations in Arctic are not simple. Very often we observe that media deliver the information that we have cooperation between China and Russia in the Arctic, but in fact the interests of China and Russia in Arctic are contradictory, because China does not want to recognize Russian claims to Northern Sea route, and Russia does not want to recognize China as the Arctic state. No one wants to recognize China as the Arctic state. However, right now, Russia is forced to cooperation with China because Western capital withdraw from Russian Arctic, and Russia cannot finish building icebreakers, LNG investments, and so on and so on. So the only balance, financial balance, economic balance for Western states in the Arctic for Russia is China. Besides, Russia observes that NATO is rising in the Arctic as well. So this is right now quite a natural partner, at least for some time. What's
the degree of naval forces in the region? Is it growing? You mentioned this idea of interest in the Arctic. They're creating an interest in the Arctic that 30 years ago just wasn't there. Is this interest backed up with naval power?
Naval power is increasing. However, we have to have in mind that Russia, the militarization of Russian Arctic continues since 2008 at least. So it's not like that Russia increased right now so seriously her naval forces in the region. Yeah, she increased it, but at the same time they were already there. So, for example, she moved some forces, for example, to Kola Peninsula, close to Norway, because she wants to threaten Norway. Or she tests some nuclear weapons in the Arctic. But in general, military presence of Russia in the Arctic is nothing new. A new thing is the presence of NATO, because NATO, until 2022, was barely interested in the Arctic. Some changes appeared after annexation of Crimea, when the United States restored their military base in Iceland, in Keflavik, Iceland. And they also introduced the maneuvers in Norway in 2017. It was entitled Trident Juncture. There were very massive exercises. However, it was not like that in the past we hadn't any military exercises in Norway. We had cold response exercises existed, but it was mainly to show that yes, Norway is capable for defense. The United States is already also capable to defend Norway as well, but there was no major NATO plan for the Arctic, mainly because of the fact that the United States was not especially interested in the Arctic at the time. We even had this slogan that the United States is reluctant Arctic power. So the United States was there because it was needed, but very often the other Western states cooperated closer with Russia rather than the United States.
Yes, I mean, the United States is a reluctant Arctic power, maybe, but we have this little irritant of Russian policy irritating the United States by reclaiming Alaska, showing a bit of muscle in Svalbard. Are these serious saber rattling, or is it just ordinary? Business as usual, saber rattling.
Before 2022, there was no major dispute concerning Alaska. Of course, some Russian nationalists claim something that we would like to regain Alaska, and they put this information on the internet as a petition with penguins. So everyone was laughing because there was no penguins in the Arctic, and they don't know that our penguins are in the Antarctic rather than in the Arctic. Yeah, and President Vladimir Putin at the time said there is no issue of Alaska in case of Russian policy. However, right now we observe that some parliamentarians in Russia are raising the case, but it is not like that this government officially decided to also take the issue of Alaska. What happens in the public narration is that nationalists in Alaska, in Russia, claim that Alaska was not sold, but what was given to the United States for some time, like for example Hong Kong for Britain in case of China. Of course, when we read the treaties, there is no kind of justification for such statement. We know exactly that it was sold. And of course, after 2022, the United States are much more interested in Alaska, in the Arctic, but some signs of greater interest in the region we observe after annexation of Crimea, but especially during the term of Donald Trump, not because of the Trump itself, but because of the activity of Secretary of Defense James Mattis, who introduced new Arctic strategy for the United States. And in this strategy, both Russia and China were defined as threat in the region, which was sustained in the newest Arctic strategy delivered by the Biden administration. So yes, the United States right now observe they need to be more engaged in the region. In case of Svalbard, it's kind of putting the pressure on Norway because Russia recognizes that Norway is pivotal for the Western interest in the region and one of the key elements of the NATO defense in the region. So they would like to put pressure on Norway to be much softer, especially when in the past Norway was using conducting this policy high north, low tension, so kind of balancing between the United States and Russia. Right now, Norway went, like other Western states in the Arctic, towards the United States.
Moving back into, and let's take a bit of a historical perspective on this, a remarkable expansion of the Russian state eastward, and to get this gigantic coastline on the Arctic. What was it a reluctant imperial power, or did it positively expand to populate this area with, I don't know, convicts or exiles? Was it a conscious policy to expand east into the Arctic, or did it just keep going?
There were missions, geographical missions financed by Tsar eastward to find what is there. And that is
19th century thing, or
18th century and earlier. And then they, of course, reached as well the America, and they established a colony in current Alaska. But to be fair, there was a problem with settlers there, so that is why they put a lot of convicts there. There was also a problem with colonial policy of Russia itself, because today Russians can say that, yeah, we made a mistake to sell Alaska because they found gold there and so on. But for the vast majority of time, Alaska did not bring profit for Russia, and they didn't know what to do with it. The number of inhabitants there was quite small, so it was, as far as I remember, 700 people. So it is not very enormous number of settlers there. That is why it was very easy to bring them back Russia after Alaska was sold. Some people, of course, remained there, but not too many. In fact, Russia did not have any serious idea what to do with the territories in the Arctic. They expanded because they could.
Yes.
And in case of the islands in Arctic, until the beginning of 20th century, the vast majority of islands in the Arctic, not only Russian, were terra incognita. No one knew what is there exactly, to whom it should belong, and so on and so on. So the regulations started in 20th century.
Final question to you, Dr. Damski. Empires are hugely, just bringing on from your point about the lack of profitability of these ventures. Empires are hugely expensive. They can bankrupt the imperial powers. Do the powers now, Russia, China especially, have any notion of what it would cost to exploit the Arctic?
And this question is very difficult because the conditions are changing. So the probable cost is going to decrease because the ice cap is melting. And this also makes the position of Russia weaker because, yeah, Russia has the biggest fleet of icebreakers in the world, near 50 as far as I remember. But in the future, this ice fleet is going to be useless if there is no ice cap in the Arctic. Yeah? So we knew at least for 20 years about natural resources in the Arctic, about the scale for 15 or more. But until now, it was not a very good place to dig or drill because of the expenses. However, the climate is changing, and we are starting drilling. Norway, for example, said that she is going to change her economy for green economy. However, Norway is drilling, and drilling much more because she wants to sell oil and gas, for example, to global south states, because they will not be able to produce a lot of energy for their cars, houses and so on, and oil and gas is going to be cheap.
Fascinating rush for resources. Dr. Damski, thank you very much for coming to our programme. Great to have you. That's all we have time for today. Keep watching TVP World, but join us next time for How We Got Here.